All right, everyone. Here we are with the end of chapter 24. Today, it's just a quick look at the limitations of GDP. Um, so, we know that we want to use GDP to measure the overall performance of an economy, um, but it's not always the best measure of how well we're doing and total output. So, we're going to look at some of those limits today. First off, it doesn't include non market activities. We talked about this a little bit on the first day of this chapter, but it doesn't include the things that we do for ourselves or the things um, we do for our neighbors or make for ourselves or whatever. Because it doesn't happen in the marketplace, it's not included. This understates GDP. We're actually producing more than is shown in GDP. It doesn't consider leisure time. Um, the average work week in the United States in 1900 was about 53 hours, and it's about 34 hours today. I know that says 2012, but that is still accurate today. We also have more vacations, holidays, paid time off. Um, Working life is shorter and better than it has been in the past, but we don't see that reflected in GDP. Um, so that once again can understate our economic well-being. We're actually better off because our jobs are taking less time and we are having more benefits from them. GDP does not include transfer payments. So those Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment, all those things, they're excluded because they don't represent current production. But for the people receiving them, they are better off. They're able to use that money and go out and purchase things, and that makes us overall better off. GDP does not consider quality. The best example of this is a $3,000 computer in 1985 and a $3,000 computer today are vastly different, but in terms of GDP, they're reflected the exact same. So in this case, GDP would also understate how well off we are. Here's the example of the Apple IIe in 1986 was about $4,000. Um, so compare that to a computer that would cost that much today, and the capabilities are nuts. Basically, on this computer, you could put disks in and type. GDP does not consider the underground economy. We talked about this day one of this chapter as well. GDP vastly understates the total production in the economy because there's a lot of production that is not recorded. Those illegal things, as well as people being paid under the table, cash only jobs, uh, the you do your neighbor's taxes, they change your oil. None of that is recorded, and so we're not going to see it reflected in GDP. Um, Underground economy, they vary from place to place. We're going to talk about a lot about Zimbabwe in the next couple chapters. Zimbabwe had an economic crisis a while back, and they estimated that 63, and at one point it was as high as 84% of their GDP was underground economy. It does not consider externalities. GDP does not subtract negative externalities, those undesirable side effects of production, the pollution, and all those things. So this actually overstates our well-being. If production is causing a lot of pollution to the environment, we're actually going to be overstating how well off we are. Um, GDP doesn't consider what types of goods are being produced. So the best example for this is North Korea, right? North Korea has a decent GDP, but they're producing a lot of military goods and not enough consumer goods. On a daily basis, their populace are going without. Um, and and that's a fault of GDP. It doesn't tell us what we're getting, just how much. What is the total dollar value of all final goods and services? Doesn't matter what goods and services. Here's the same weight to a rifle and or a gun in a textbook. Um, if they cost the same, they're considered the same in the eyes of GDP. GDP does not measure quality of life. Um, it it doesn't tell how well off society is in terms of our well-being and satisfaction. There are arguments that people are happier today than they have been in the past. There are also arguments that work is more stressful. Even in those 34 hours that we're working, we may be working less in terms of the average work week, but there's a lot more stress. The idea that you have to answer emails and calls all the time. It's not like the olden days where you finished your job and you went home, and the only way people could get a hold of you was a phone call, and they knew not to call between 4 and 8 p.m. because that was family time. Things like that don't exist anymore. So that can change the way uh, society is feeling overall, and that's not going to be reflected in GDP. There have been talks about trying to get a world happiness index and trying to add that into a GDP. I don't know where that kind of stands. Um, I love Robert Kennedy's quote here. The gross domestic product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligences of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. Just saying, GDP, though it's a standard of economic well being, it's a measure of economic well being, it doesn't give us the full picture. This is a great thing that you can look through um, in the slideshow. It just goes through what does wealth look like around the country? What does a typical family have? And here you can see the ideas in each picture. Each family has all of their possessions outside of their house. So this was from Mali, and you can see kind of some of the stats about Mali. Here, this one is India, and you can see some stats. Then we've got China. This is a Japanese house. Then we got the United States and the cul-de-sac. It's got to be from Texas. GDP doesn't consider distribution of output. Um, this is kind of that idea of just because a country is producing a lot doesn't mean that it has equitable distribution of goods. It might be that of the $20 trillion GDP, that most of it is going to the top 1%, like we have in the United States. Um, or it could be more close, like Sweden, where stuff is more evenly distributed. But we don't know in GDP. We just know the total dollar value of what is produced, not who's getting the benefit of that. Per capita GDP is going to be an important metric here. How much is produced per person? It's an average. Say if we took the total production and we divided it out among the total population, that would tell us what is produced per person. And if it was distributed evenly, what would everybody have? GDP doesn't measure changes in the standard of living. Um, this is where population matters. If our GDP is going up every year, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're better off. If our population is rising faster than our output, we could actually be worse off. So, our best metric is real GDP per capita. If real GDP per capita is rising every year, that means our standard of living is going up. But GDP on its own is not going to tell us that. To calculate GDP per capita, we divide GDP for that year divided by the population of that year. And here in 2004 it was about 36,000. I forgot to check this before I started this video, but I do believe we're right around $72,000 a year. Nope, that seems wrong. 56? I will check. Here was 2015. Yeah, if 2015 was $50,000, I think we're close to 56,000 right now. This is one way to determine how well off people are in the country. Um, if GDP rises faster than population, our standard of living will go up. If population rises faster than GDP, standard of living will actually be falling. Here you see our GDP per capita. We've got a secular trend. It has been one of growth. We see this increase year to year to year. Here you can see this was during the recession, uh, changes in GDP per capita in different states. Here, uh, you can see updated a little bit. World average, US average. In here you can see countries above the world GDP per capita average. In 2009, blue are above, orange are below. Here you can see GDP per capita around the world. You can look up some more current stuff, but you can see there are some. Typically, the oil countries are much higher, and small countries here are the lowest. All right,